I woke up to the sharp smell of antiseptic and the faint tapping of high heels on the floor, not the hurried steps of a nurse, but of Jennifer. A harsh white light streamed through the small window, reflecting off the nameplate by my bed. Sunrise Elderly Care Facility, Atlanta, Georgia. It took me a few seconds to understand what was happening. Last night, I was still at home. I remember the cup of tea she brought me, peppermint, but with an odd, bitter scent. The last thing I recall is my throat burning and my limbs going numb. Now Jennifer was standing at the foot of my bed, smiling softly as if nothing were wrong. "The doctor said you need rest," she said. "I signed the papers to have you transferred here so you can get better care." I tried to sit up, but the IV line pulled tight, the needle biting into my arm. "I didn't sign anything," I whispered hoarsely. Jennifer tilted her head, that fake smile never fading. "Oh, but you did, Mother. The papers are in the office, with your signature right on them." She turned and walked out, the scent of her expensive perfume lingering in the air. In that cold light, I looked out the window, at the shadow of an old oak tree stretching across the ground, and I understood this wasn't a hospital. It was a prison painted white. I used to believe I had already weathered the worst storms of my life. My husband passed away in his sleep, gently, as if he had only stepped out for a moment. My only son, Marcus, grew up to be the one thing I had left to be proud of, and I, Viola Smith, a widow at 62, devoted my life to keeping a home, a memory, and the Smith name free of shame. But as it turns out, not every storm arrives with thunder and lightning. Some begin with the quiet shuffle of slippers in the kitchen each morning, and the half-pitying, half-condescending gaze of the woman I once called my daughter-in-law. Our house sat on the northern edge of Atlanta, atop Jackson Hill, where every morning sunlight spilled over rows of red-tiled rooftops. I still woke at 6, brewed coffee in my old copper kettle, swept the porch, watered the flowers. Those rituals weren't about living. They were how I reminded myself that I was still alive. Marcus always said I was like his father, someone who needed everything in order, neat to the point of obsession. I laughed because it was true. The only thing I never could control in my life was the woman my son chose to marry. Jennifer Davis, a lawyer, 28, beautiful, quick, and with that tone people have when they believe they're always right. The moment Marcus brought her home, I knew she would never belong to this house. I remember that evening clearly. It was drizzling in Atlanta, the yellow light from the dining room spilling through the window, and Marcus beamed as if he had brought home the future itself. "Mom, this is Jennifer." "I think you'll really like her." Jennifer extended her hand. "Lovely to meet you, Mrs. Smith." I shook her hand, cold, with wine-red nails and a silver ring on her finger. No one needed to say it, but I saw it clearly. She wasn't here to join a family. She was here to take charge. Throughout dinner, Jennifer talked about work, clients, a new French restaurant in Midtown. Marcus smiled, captivated by every word she said. I simply ate in silence, listening to the rain against the window, and wondered, has anyone ever taught this girl how to listen? After dinner, she stood up, glanced around the living room, and said, "This house is beautiful. But if we repaint it in brighter tones, it could look much more modern." Marcus laughed. I didn't. That was the first moment I realized I had just opened the door to a storm. When Marcus died in the accident, half my soul was carved away. The house grew terrifyingly large. During the funeral, Jennifer remained composed. No tears, no trembling. She only said, "He wanted everything handled quickly. I'll take care of it." And she did. She sold Marcus's car, moved all the bank accounts into her name, and re-signed the life insurance contract. I asked, "Why so fast, Jennifer?" She replied lightly, "The world I live in runs on paperwork, not emotions, Mother." I didn't argue. That same night, she changed the password to the family's joint account, the one my husband and I built over a lifetime. Jennifer stayed in the house, saying, "I don't want you to be alone." At first, I believed her. She cooked, shopped for groceries, brought me tea every night. But things began to change, quietly, like roots growing under the ground. One afternoon, when I opened the filing cabinet to retrieve the property deed, the folder had been replaced. The paper inside, a photocopy of the insurance contract, no longer had my name on it. When I asked, Jennifer smiled. "Oh, I just made a new copy." The old one was getting worn out. That smile kept me awake for nights afterward. I began to pay attention to the tea she brought every evening. Jennifer always came at 8, saying it helped me sleep. It was pale in color, smelled of peppermint, but left a faint bitterness on the back of my tongue. The first time, I thought it was just age. The second time, I thought it was her. One night, I pretended to drink it. After she left, I poured the rest into a small glass jar and hid it beneath my bed. The next morning, Jennifer asked, "Did you sleep well, Mother?" I looked at her and said, "Yes." So well I could barely tell if I was dreaming or awake. She smiled, not realizing that was my first warning. Jennifer began to take over everything. She said I shouldn't drive anymore because my eyesight was getting weak. She transferred the landline into her name to prevent scam calls. And then she changed the safe's combination. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone. "Yes, the medical records are ready. She's showing signs of confusion. The doctor will confirm it this week." I stood behind the door, my hands clenched so tight they bled. She was fabricating a medical report to legally strip away my rights. One morning, I went to the bank to check my account. The clerk said, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith. This account is now managed by your legal guardian, Mrs. Jennifer Davis." I froze. Legal guardian? I had never signed any authorization. When I got home and confronted her, Jennifer calmly replied, "But you did sign it, Mother." The day I brought the insurance papers upstairs, "Your signature's right there." I stared at her. It was my signature. Except for one thing. I clearly remember that was the night I drank her tea. The last night I spent in my home, Jennifer brought the tea again. Her voice was sickly sweet. "Tomorrow I'll take you for a full checkup. You probably need some rest at a care facility." I nodded, smiled, then placed the glass jar of the previous night's tea right on my bedside table, where she would be sure to see it. I wanted her to know I had figured it out. What I didn't know was how far she would go. Around midnight, my throat began to burn. Then everything went black. And when I woke up, I was already in a nursing home. I never thought I would live to see this, being sent to a nursing home by my own daughter-in-law, as if I were an old object no longer of use. On my first day at Sunrise Elderly Care, I sat on the metal bed, staring at beige walls, listening to the ticking clock that seemed to whisper, every minute stolen was another piece of my life fading away. I still remembered what Jennifer had said that morning. "Don't worry, Mother. They'll take good care of you here." Then she left, leaving behind that faint trace of expensive perfume, like a signature of possession. My room was on the second floor, number 12, right by a window overlooking the back garden. Every morning, the nurses rotated shifts on time, except one stood out. Angela, a brown-skinned woman around 26, soft-spoken but with sharp eyes. On the third day, while checking my blood pressure, she leaned closer and whispered, "Do you really want to be here?" I smiled faintly. "If I said no, would you take me home?" She chuckled, but her eyes didn't. "It's just strange. Your admission record says temporary cognitive impairment, but you sound more lucid than I do." Her words chilled me. I knew what Jennifer had done. She'd forged a medical report. And if the record said that, then all my assets were legally in the hands of my guardian, Jennifer Smith. On the 5th day, while the nurse changed my bedsheets, I accidentally found a small note tucked inside the pocket of my patient gown. Scrawled handwriting read, "Don't trust anyone who signs for you. I can help." I looked around. It had to be Angela. That evening she returned, pretending to check my medication, and murmured, I reviewed your file. The signature on your intake form doesn't match the one on your driver's license. You're sure? I asked. Absolutely. I used to work in the hospital's legal department. I grabbed her hand. Help me get out of here, Angela. You're my only hope. She nodded. But we'll need proof. And only one person can provide it. Someone who worked with your husband. A name surfaced instantly in my mind. Harold Tate, Marcus's former insurance attorney. If anyone could recognize a forgery, it was him. Angela smuggled her personal phone into the facility. We waited until late at night when the others were off shift. She whispered, "Do you remember his number?" I nodded slightly, my fingers trembling as I dialed. On the other end, a rough male voice answered. "Who's this?" "Harold. It's me, Viola Smith." A long pause. "Good Lord, Viola. I thought you'd moved to Tennessee." "Tennessee? Who told you that?" "The residency transfer paperwork came from your own email, confirmed by Jennifer." I closed my eyes, swallowing the rage burning inside. "Harold, listen to me. I never left Atlanta, and I'm being held in a nursing home." He was silent for a few seconds. "I understand. I'll check the records. But if I come, be careful. She might be watching you." 3 days later, Angela brought me an old envelope. "A nurse found this in the hallway trash bin. It had your name on it. I opened it. A bank letter stating that Marcus Smith's life insurance account had been fully withdrawn. The new beneficiary, Jennifer Smith. In the corner, a pen stroke in a different ink. Someone had tried to copy my signature, but it was shaky, weak, forced. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't run. I had to lure the fox out of its den, using its own bait. From that day on, I began to pretend to grow weaker. When the nurse checked my vitals, I breathed heavily. When the doctor asked questions, I answered slowly, hesitantly, enough to make them believe my mind was slipping. Angela understood perfectly and played along. 3 weeks later, Jennifer appeared again. She wore a black dress, leather jacket, Hermes bag in hand, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. "You're looking better, Mother," she said, setting a pastry box on the table. "Thanks to you," I smiled faintly. She poured tea, peppermint, as always. "I spoke with the lawyer about the house. You don't need to worry about the paperwork." "Everything's almost done," I asked quietly. "My name's still on the insurance certificate, isn't it?" She froze, just for half a second, but enough for guilt to flicker in her eyes. "Of course," she replied quickly. Then she stood, smoothed her dress, her smile returning. "You should rest." "I'll come back soon." I nodded, watching her leave, and thought, "Yes, come back, because next time you won't walk away so easily." A week later, Angela slipped into my room with an envelope hidden in her pocket. "Mail for you. No sender name, but I think you should see it." I opened it. Verified evidence, forged signature. "Wait for me. H.T." Harold had found it. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe, but the anger still burned quietly beneath. That night, I sat by the window, listening to the rain against the glass. Loneliness felt as thick as the fog outside. I thought of Marcus. If he were alive, he would never believe the woman he married was killing his mother in the most legal way possible, with a pen. I began studying the nurses' and administrators' schedules. Each night, there was a 30-minute window when the hallway was empty. Angela helped me unlock the record storage room. Inside, rows of metal shelves held dozens of medical files. I found mine. Viola M. Smith, Case 412B. Inside was a copy of the guardianship form, my forged signature, and a bank certification stamp. Angela gasped. "My God! She even hired a fake notary." I nodded, pulse pounding in my ears. At the bottom of the page, a handwritten note read, "All benefits transferred to J. Smith." I quietly slipped the entire file into a brown envelope. On the way out, Angela whispered, "If they catch you, they'll label you delusional for real." I smiled. Good. They'll never suspect a crazy woman can expose them. 2 days later, Harold called. I have everything, Viola. But she knows I'm investigating. You need to brace yourself. What do you mean? Jennifer came to my office this morning, asked outright if I'd been in contact with you. I lied, but be careful, I gripped the phone tighter. Harold, I'm not afraid of her anymore. She should be afraid of me. That night, Jennifer showed up unannounced. No call, no warning. She closed the door behind her and sat beside my bed. You know, Mother, she began softly, I'm honestly tired of trying to help you. I stayed silent. You had everything. Husband, son, a house. I had to fight for every inch. All I want now is for you to have peace. Here. I looked her in the eyes and said slowly, Peace? Or disappearance? She smiled. Depends on how you see it. Then she stood, left a cup of tea on the table, and walked to the door. As it clicked shut, I turned to Angela. It's time. She nodded, pulling a small device from her pocket. Camera hidden in the flower vase. Don't drink the tea tonight. I didn't sleep. Every sound in the corridor echoed like a ticking countdown. Jennifer would return. I knew she would. I was no longer the trembling woman lost in the dark. I was Viola Smith, widow of Marcus Smith, a woman who built a life from nothing, and I would not let anyone, not even someone who carried the Smith name, bury me alive in a white-painted room. Before dawn, Angela whispered, Are you sure? I met her gaze, my eyes burning like embers. She poisoned me with tea. Now it's her turn to taste the truth. I don't remember when the rain began in Atlanta, only that the window of my room at sunrise quivered with each gust. The pale green nightlight made my skin look paler, as if the blood had been drained. That night was strangely quiet, so quiet I could hear the second hand climb notch by notch on the wall clock. I lay still, eyes wide open in the dark, feeling as if I were eavesdropping on my own life. I'd thought that after Angela tucked the tiny camera into the plastic flower vase, I would breathe easier. There's evidence now, I told myself. But at the very moment you think you're safe, what truly arrives is fear. Is it enough? Will anyone believe me? What will she do when she knows I know? Those questions seeped into my bones, cold as rain sliding through the cracks in the tiles. The next morning, the rain stopped. Atlanta's sky was silvery gray, smooth like a blank page. Angela came on early shift, checked my blood pressure, then glanced around and gave a slight nod, a signal that the camera was still working. She set her hand on the mattress, whispering, Leave the teacup in the same place. Don't touch it. I'll pull the card as soon as she leaves the room. The door opened midday. Jennifer stepped in like a carefully curated ray of sun, hair in soft waves, beige coat, black handbag, red lips. She brought the familiar pot of peppermint tea. The fragrance reached my nose, obedient as a cat that's been petted for years. So long as you forget it has claws. Hello, Mother. Her voice was soft as silk. You look better. I still have a heart that beats, I said. So that's better. She smiled and poured the tea. Has that hand been pouring for years? Or only recently? After Marcus died, while the insurance money was still warm from a body? I watched those slender wrists, thought of the words legal guardian printed on paper, the smooth pen stroke bearing my signature. I remembered the numbness that night, the tea touching my tongue, the mild mint, then a fine bitter thread catching at the back of my throat. I spoke to the doctor, Jennifer said, as casually as talking about rain. They recommend you stay here a few more months. After that, I'll arrange someplace better. Private garden, someone to read scripture with you every night. To keep me at peace, I repeated. Or to make me disappear? The smile on her lips slipped a little. I knew I'd touched a nerve. She slid a folder toward me, glossy plastic cover. Take a look. Just sign here. I've worked with the insurance company. Everything will be tidy. Where's my name? I flipped through. The last page already printed Jennifer Smith beneath Authorized Representative. I curled a lip. How convenient. Because you already authorized it, she shot back, as if she'd practiced the line in a mirror. I looked straight into her eyes. I spoke softly, just loud enough for the mic in the vase to catch it. The camera in the vase is recording. For a split instant, only one, the color washed from her face as if someone had pulled a plug. Then the smile returned, so precise I nearly believed it. What a strange joke, she said, lifting the vase and giving it a shake. Inside, only foam-anchoring plastic stems. Angela had pulled the card that afternoon. I have last night's tea, I said, in a glass jar. And the bank letter from the hallway trash, showing the new beneficiary's name. She set the vase down and drew in a slow breath, as if counting the beats. Mother, she said, lowering her voice, can we talk like family? Since when have you called me Mother? On Marcus's wedding day. She smiled, a smile with a metallic tang. You hugged me. You said, welcome to the family. Back then I didn't know family meant signing in someone else's name. She shook her head. I wasn't trying to hurt you. The sentence broke in two. Her breath trembled. I was drowning. Marcus died. The debts rose. The account was empty. You still had a house, a good name. What did I have? You had me, I said. And to my surprise, my own throat tightened. I opened the door. The door is the shortest path to the safe. My voice went dry, like old paper. She dropped into the chair, pressed her forehead to the back of her hand. For a few seconds, I saw a girl without lipstick, without heels, without excuses, just a soul trying not to shatter. Feelings are dangerous, especially for someone like me, who has brooded them like eggs all her life. I'm sorry, she said. I was wrong. If you sign this set, I'll stop. I won't move you again. What does not move mean? No more poisoning? I spoke very softly, but the words hit the floor like lead. She looked at me, eyes fogged thick. You think I'm a monster? I think you're human, I said, and humans can choose. Her fingers dug into the chair arm. I'll take the papers to be destroyed. I'll tell the doctor to stop the sleeping meds. I'll restore the beneficiary name. I just need you to trust me this time, the way you did at the beginning. Trust isn't money. I pushed myself upright. You can't withdraw it. It doesn't pay interest. She stood and went to the door. Her hand closed on the knob. I saw her shoulders rise and fall, very slight. Then she came back to the table, lifted the teacup in both hands, and held it out to me. Drink. I didn't put anything in it. I want you to see I'm telling the truth. I stared at the cup until the surface stopped trembling. I looked down into it as into a well, where at the bottom, Marcus's face reflected, his gentle eyes, the way he looked at her on Thanksgiving, trusting without condition. I tried to see past what had happened, back to the day we were a family. I wanted to believe one more time. I set my hand against the base of the cup and pushed it back. You drink first. The corner of her mouth sagged like an awning with its post pulled out, only for a blink. Then she managed to prop up her composed face again. I said, drink, I said, voice unchanged. One sip. The air in the room grew so heavy, I heard the second hand snap mid-tick. She set the cup down. You don't want forgiveness, she said, almost whispering. You want me exposed. I want the truth, I answered. I don't want anyone to die. She closed her eyes and sighed, a long, straight line with knife edges. Then she opened them, and I recognized that look. No more pleading, no more currying favor. It was the look of someone who's tapped ash into the cup and decided to let it catch. Fine, she said, shoulders loosening. You've chosen. She stepped to the table, took the folder, gathered the teapot, and before she turned away, leaned in, lips near my ear. Tonight, You'll sleep very deeply." The door closed, soft as silk. I sat still, listening to the hallway floor creak under her heels. I lifted my hand to my pulse and counted to 10. Angela slipped out from the storage alcove behind the wall, eyes wide. "Did you hear?" "Tonight, tonight," I repeated, chewing the bone of a word. Angela opened the vase, slid out the memory card thin as a fingernail, and tucked it into her pocket. "I'll get this to Harold right now. Don't drink anything." "Leave the tea," I said, "for the police." We mapped the afternoon with our eyes. The duty roster spread like a war chart, when the manager does inventory, when the doctor makes rounds, when the corridor empties. I didn't lie down. I didn't doze. Every sense pinned to the door. The mint smell cooled, cold as the handshake of someone who once said they loved you. Night fell. The rain returned, heavier this time, drumming steady along the eaves. Angela texted. "Harold saw the video. Police are seeking a warrant." I smoothed the blanket, as if smoothing my own insides. If one thread trembled, the whole line would show. I shut my eyes a little, opened them a little, like a cat hunting. When the knob turned, I didn't start. My heart was already beating to a different rhythm, slow and deep. Jennifer eased the door in and closed it behind her. Her coat was wet with rain, hair beaded with droplets. No bag, no folder, only a teapot, different, shinier, cleaner. She went to the table without switching on the ceiling light. The green night light was enough to draw lines around things. I heard a faint metallic sound, the cap of a small vial perhaps. Her other hand stirred a spoon in the cup. The tap against thin porcelain rang with a clear, ruthless tone. "I see you're awake," she said. No preamble. "I've been waiting for you," I said. No padding. "Good." She slid the cup forward, no longer smiling. "Drink." "Have you drunk first?" Her chest rose and fell, but her voice was thin as a taut string. "I don't want you dead. I just need time. Time to take it all. Time to survive." I leaned in, close enough to smell rain in her hair and something strange in the air. Not mint. A dry smell, slightly bitter, with an aftertaste. I nudged the cup 1 centimeter to the left. "The camera is recording," I said again. "Not in the vase." Her eyes flashed. She scanned the ceiling, the walls, the curtain's edge, quick as a bat. She stepped back, as if an invisible cord had tightened around her throat. Then she laughed. "There isn't one." "You're bluffing." I settled against the pillow and nodded toward the window, where the faint red-blue smear of something outside glowed. A vehicle. She flicked her head that way, only half a second. But it was enough. The door burst open. Angela, Harold, 2 officers. The shout, "Police!" split the air like a clean blade. Jennifer let the spoon fall. The tap on the glaze rang like a small, sorry bell. She straightened, shoulders pulled back, like someone who has decided to step into a mugshot wearing a wet raincoat. "Jennifer Smith," the officer read, voice textbook. "You are under arrest for suspected forgery, elder abuse, and intentional poisoning." "I didn't," her voice rasped. She looked at me. "Mother." I said nothing. Some sentences have been said too many times, and some, if spoken, would kill both the hearer and the speaker. I simply laid my hand on the blanket over my heart. It was still beating. That was enough. The cuffs clicked shut on her wrists. Jennifer looked around as if a door might appear between 4 white walls. There wasn't one, only rain and the stale mint in a cup no one drank. As they led her past the bed, she bit her lip till it bled, eyes reddening. "You'll regret this." "No," I said evenly. "I'll remember." The door closed. Outside, the rain seemed to exhale. Angela sat on the edge of the mattress, her warm hand on the back of mine. "It's over," she said, a little shaky with adrenaline. Harold examined the tea, sealed the evidence bag. The other officer affixed the tamper seal, the red number like the final stamp on a life's verdict. I sank back into the pillow. Not from fatigue. From emptiness. The silence after a storm is the most uncomfortable sound. You think you'll cheer, but what arrives is a hand kneading your shoulder, asking, "Where does it hurt?" And only then you realize, everywhere. A day drifted by in thin fog. Reporters called. Harold blocked most. I said no comment, not out of fear, because I wouldn't turn tragedy into lunch. Angela cleaned, changed the sheets, opened the window to let the wind in. The antiseptic smell faded like a belated apology. At night, I dreamed of Marcus. He stood at the foot of my bed, hands in his pockets, that lopsided smile. "You pulled her back with the truth," he said, voice the same as before, not with rage. I was about to ask, back to where? But he slipped into the soft dark behind him. Morning came, the clouds thin as a veil. Harold returned with a stack of papers and a brief note from the police. The vial taken from the pocket of Jennifer's coat matched the trace in the cup. Yesterday's video showed her face clearly, her actions clear. The signature in the admission file, when compared to pen stroke analysis, didn't match the driver's license. The legal cogs began to turn, grinding, clacking. I listened, nodded, signed. It all felt like signing for lost property. "Sorry, this was yours, here it is back, far too late." On the third day, Fulton County Jail messaged, "Jennifer wanted to see me." Harold looked at me, asked if I was sure. I nodded, not out of magnanimity. I needed a period at the end of the sentence. The visitation room was cold as a glass box. Jennifer sat behind the plexiglass, hands on the table, no lipstick, no disguise. Younger, strangely. When the mask comes off, people revert to their real age. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice had no sharpness left, only bone. "I came to listen," I said, "not to forgive." She nodded. "I won't justify it. I did it." "I know. I didn't think I'd hit bottom so fast. When Marcus died, I was like someone without gravity. I slammed my hands against every wall, hoping something would hold me. I saw money. Money doesn't teach people how to love," I said, "but it teaches people not to die." She gave a dry laugh. "Have you ever been afraid of dying poor?" "I'm afraid of living cruel," I said, "because that lasts longer." She was quiet. Her eyes watered. "I miss him. I hated you because you had everything of him, and I had nothing. I hated so much I couldn't tell the difference between taking and killing." I looked at her hands, the faint blue veins under the skin. I remembered those hands once planting white chrysanthemums with Marcus. I remembered what I said in the kitchen once, "Come inside, it's cold." And I understood. Sometimes forgiveness isn't opening the door for someone to come back, but choosing to stop using the door as a weapon. "I won't ask the court to be lenient," I said. "I can't. But if you learn a trade in there, nursing for instance, when you come out, come see me. I have a place called the Marcus Foundation. There people use their hands to hold, not to take." She sniffed, laughing through tears. "You still call me her." "I'll call you daughter when you stand at my door without a teapot," I said. "No weapons, no lies." She laughed aloud, the first real laugh I'd heard from her in years. Bitter, but clean. On the way back, the rain had stopped. Atlanta lay under a pale sun. Puddles on the concrete yard reflected the sky like shards of repaired glass. On the windowsill, the old plastic vase had been replaced by Angela with a bundle of real lavender. Lavender doesn't pretend. It arrives and says plainly, "I am myself. I am not mint. I will not lull anyone to sleep." That night I opened my notebook and wrote, "There are those who use tea to kill, and those who use truth to save. I choose the latter, even when my throat burns." I set down the pen and closed the book. The clock ticked again. This time, not like a blade, like a heartbeat. the heartbeat of a house, of me, and somewhere, perhaps even of Jennifer, if she truly chooses to live again. Tomorrow will be papers, investigations, interviews. I know. Justice isn't a single falling hammer. It's a slow mill, grinding every grain until, at last, there's flour fine enough to bake bread. I closed my eyes and thought of the batch of chrysanthemum cookies I'll bake when I'm truly home. I'll place one on the windowsill for Marcus and one on the step for Jennifer, on the day she returns without a teapot. As for tonight, I will sleep. No drugs, no mint. Only the rain that has retreated, leaving a quiet Atlanta, and my heart, an old, tired heart that has never surrendered. On the first morning after everything, I woke to a thin beam of sunlight slipping through the nursing home window. No more smell of sedatives, no more click of high heels pacing the floor, only the breeze threading through a white curtain, brushing my cheek. I survived. But something in me died with that night, the fragile belief that kindness is always repaid with love. 2 weeks later, I was cleared to leave the facility. Harold, the devoted old lawyer, drove me home in his worn sedan. As the car turned down the little slope into Cascade Heights, my house came into view. Dusty roof tiles, a rusted iron fence, stone steps split with cracks. "Are you sure you want to go back there?" Harold asked, hand still on the wheel. "I was born there, married there, buried my husband there. If I don't return, who will bring it back to life?" He said nothing more, just nodded, then opened the door and helped me out. Crossing the porch, the scent of damp and dried jasmine filled my lungs. Every footstep on the old wooden floor sounded like a whisper from the past. I looked around. The wedding photo, the pendulum clock, my husband's embroidered cloth, all still there, as if waiting for me to come back. On the living room table, Marcus's framed photo sat precisely in place. I picked it up, taking in my son's smile, gentle, young, and now only a memory. "Son, I kept my promise." My voice was hoarse, trembling like dry leaves. In the first days, I lived slowly. Mornings, I brewed tea and sat on the porch, listening to the traffic on Pryor Street. Afternoons, I walked the neighborhood, greeting a few old neighbors. Everyone asked, "Are you all right, Viola?" I just smiled. "I'm still breathing. That's all right." But at night, when everything fell silent, I faced a house too wide and memories too tight. Every corner held the shape of Marcus and Jennifer, their laughter in the kitchen, their eyes on Thanksgiving, their hands interlaced while planting flowers. I once dreamed simply that my son be happy. But inside his happiness hid a tragedy I failed to see. Angela, the young nurse who saved me, visited on Friday afternoon. She brought a fruit basket, a smile, and warm eyes. "I couldn't sit still knowing you came back to this house alone," she said. "This house fed me for half my life, Angela. It's not as frightening as people think." She smiled softly, poured tea, then asked, "Do you know what you'll do next?" I looked at the cup, breathed in the peppermint, and said quietly, "I don't know. But I don't want to just survive. I want to live with meaning." Angela watched me, her gaze like encouragement. "You could turn your story into strength for others." I laughed. "Who wants to hear about an old woman being poisoned? People who have survived, like you." That night, the 9 o'clock news aired a story. An 82-year-old woman in Augusta had her son forge documents to sell her home. My chest tightened as I watched. Her story was mine. Except she had no one to stand up for her. I turned off the TV, picked up a pen, and wrote on a blank sheet, "If no one will speak for them, I will." That simple line became the spark of a new journey. 2 days later, I went to Harold's office, a small building in downtown Atlanta, smelling of old paper and coffee. "Have you got another idea, Viola?" he asked, nudging his glasses up. "I want to start a fund." "What kind of fund?" "A fund for elderly people who've been deceived, robbed of their assets. like me, not just legal help, a place that helps them tell their stories. Harold sat in silence for a long while. What will you call it? Marcus Foundation. He nodded, a slow smile forming. A beautiful name. I answered softly, I want my son to keep protecting others, even after he's gone. On opening day, Atlanta blazed with sun. A banner hung over the community center entrance. Marcus Foundation. Protecting trust, restoring justice. The attendees were few, a handful of lawyers, some neighbors, a local reporter. I stood backstage, heart pounding. When Harold introduced me, I walked to the podium, hands slightly shaking, but voice steady. I'm Viola Smith. I was once a victim. I was once pushed by family into a place they called care. I once believed I deserved to be forgotten. But today, I stand here not to recount a tragedy, but to say this. Justice begins the moment we dare to speak again. The hall went still. Then applause spread, swelling like a wave. I bowed, tears falling, not of sorrow, but of release. After the ceremony, the first letters arrived. An elderly woman in Macon wrote, My son sold my house to gamble. Thank you for giving me the courage to speak. An old man in Texas emailed, I read your story. You made me believe forgiveness isn't weakness. I read every line, noting every story. Each letter was a piece of memory revived, forgotten people finding their way to stand. Angela became the foundation's full-time assistant. She said, half joking, half true, You know, since working with you, I trust people more. Don't trust people, I smiled. Trust the truth they carry in their hearts. One June afternoon, a letter came from Fulton County Jail. Slanted handwriting, black ink, paper slightly wrinkled. Mother Viola, I don't know if you'll read this. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I only want to say that every day in prison, I'm learning how to start over. I'm in a nursing assistant program. When I get out, I want to care for the elderly, like Angela did for you. If you allow it, I want to donate all the savings I have left to the Marcus Foundation. I read it over and over, my heart tightening and opening in a strange, simultaneous ache. No anger remained, only regret that if it had been sooner, we might have been a family in truth. I wrote back, Jennifer, I forgave you the day you confessed. If you truly want to help others, I will wait for you at the Marcus Foundation. Justice does not end in a courtroom. It begins in a heart willing to change. That evening, Angela and I sat on the porch as dusk fell and cicadas hummed. Angela asked, Do you think Jennifer truly regrets it? Maybe. But forgiveness doesn't require certainty. It only asks for courage. She was quiet, then said, If it were me, I don't think I could. Perhaps because you've never lost a child, I answered gently. When you've lost everything, you'll understand. Hatred only makes you lose more. Angela nodded, her eyes growing still. A breeze blew through, carrying the scent of jasmine, a smell I once hated, now oddly peaceful. A year passed, and the Marcus Foundation had helped more than 300 people. We organized free consultations, legal aid, and therapy for abused seniors. The press called me the quiet mother of justice. But I didn't feel like a symbol. I was only someone who had learned to look directly at a wound and choose not to let it rot further. On my desk, I kept a single photo, Marcus and Jennifer on their wedding day, both smiling. I haven't taken it down because it reminds me that what was once good is still worth remembering. One September morning, Harold stepped into the office and set down an envelope. Jennifer's been granted early parole. She wants to see you. I sat in silence for a long time. No fear, no anger, only a strange calm. 3 days later, I went to Fulton Jail. Jennifer sat on the other side of the glass, thinner, hair short, eyes deeply shadowed. When she saw me, she stood, lips trembling. You really came? I said I would wait. We were quiet, only the sound of rain against the window. Then she said, "You know, in the nursing class, I met so many people like you, strong, but hurt. I want to help them." "Then start again, Jennifer. Not to erase your mistakes, but to do what's right." She cried, and I pressed my hand against hers through the cold glass. In that moment, I knew Marcus, somewhere, was smiling. 6 months later, Jennifer was released. She came to the Marcus Foundation, slipping in quietly. Angela stiffened for a beat, but I simply nodded and offered her a seat. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to," I replied. "Just do." I handed her a stack of files. "These are people who need care. Starting today, you'll work with Angela." She took them, tears spotting the pages. "Mother, thank you for not giving up on me." "Marcus never wanted me to give up on anyone," I said, smiling. For the first time, I saw a light in her eyes, the light of someone who'd truly changed. One afternoon, I sat in the backyard, sipping tea, listening to Jennifer and Angela talking in the office. I heard laughter, paper rustling, keys clacking. That laughter, I thought I would never hear again. The sun slipped behind the oaks, washing the lawn in gold. I opened my notebook and wrote the final lines of my memoir. Justice is not punishment. Justice is the moment we are strong enough to choose mercy amid the ashes. I was once a mother who lost everything. But today, I am a woman granted a second chance, not by anyone else, but by my own heart. I set down the pen, closed the notebook, and smiled. Atlanta blazed red in the sky, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. I used to think justice only came from the courts, from verdicts stamped with a red seal. But now I understand. Sometimes justice arrives in silence. It's when you no longer tremble before the person who once wanted to kill you. It's when you look straight at the one who betrayed you, and instead of hate, you choose to stop. Not to let them escape punishment, but so that you yourself can go on living. If someone ever made you doubt the value of kindness, remember this. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It only means you are strong enough not to need revenge anymore. I am Viola Smith, and this is my story about justice, trust, and truth. If you still believe that the truth will find its way, hit subscribe so I can tell you more stories about justice and the human heart.